Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Brecken Brandstrader, and I'm the Senior Editor, Gemstones at National Jeweler. I'm pleased to welcome you to the latest episode of My Next Question, National Jeweler's webinar series. Today's session is hosted by Editor-in-Chief Michelle Graff and features three guests: Edahn Golan, founder of Edahn Golan Diamond Research and Data Limited, Sherry Smith, Director of Business Development at the Edge Retail Academy, and Peter Smith, President of Memoir and Hearts on Fire. Before I turn the discussion over to Michelle and her guests, I just wanted to let our attendees know that if they have a question, they can drop it into the Zoom Q&A box at the bottom of their screens. I'll be back on after the discussion to share any questions with our panelists. Also, today's session is being recorded and will be available on the National Jeweler website this coming Friday, January 14th. Now I'll turn it over to Michelle to get things started.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Brecken, and hello, everyone. Happy New Year.
Good morning.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Thank you so much for joining me for this little reunion. The four of us, I guess, sat down last January, so January 2021, to talk about 2020, and now we're going to talk about 2021 and 2022. So just a little bit of a rewind. 2020 surprised everyone, I think, when it outperformed 2019, especially when you consider how it started with all the lockdowns due to the pandemic and all the uncertainty. So what do we know about jewelry sales in 2021 at this point? And Sherry, I'm going to start with you.
Okay, well, just so you know, for clarification, I only speak about the independent channel. Edahn, I'm sure, will share all his wonderful numbers from the broad market. But sales for the independent channel were up 38% over 2020 and 40% over 2019.
Wow. Okay.
That's a good year.
Wow. Edahn, what do you have? Because I know you're, as Sherry mentioned, you don't look at just independents, but you also look at the chains, the bigger sellers, et cetera.
Yes, so overall, U.S. jewelry sales estimated at $94.2 billion, which is up almost 50%. It's an insane figure if you take into account that people could have spent money on many other things as well. So we definitely tapped into two things: a desire and a sentiment that is deep-seated, that people easily connect to.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. Edahn's number is historic on so many levels, right?
Yeah.
94.2 billion is probably $32 billion bigger than the biggest year we've ever had in our history, period. So that's really, we're talking about something that's not just the best year in history, but has literally, killed the previous best year ever, which was probably somewhere in that 62, plus billion dollar range. So it has been a phenomenal year.
And Edahn, I'm going to bounce it back to you. This 94 billion, how far back do your figures go?
Offhand, right now, I have till somewhere in the 80s. So, I mean, we're looking at a graph that goes like this, goes a little bit down, and then just shoots up like crazy. I mean, think about it. 50% is, usually if you have a growth, 3%, 4%, 5% at a good year, sometimes a little bit more. But, mid double digits.
Shocking. Yeah.
So really, before we get into like the why, I just want to know, did anyone expect this? Like when we sat here last year at this time talking about 2021, did you expect it? I mean, I think we all said we thought it'd be a good year. Did it exceed expectations? Peter?
I think anybody who suggests otherwise is just, it's revisionist history, because in no scenario, in no conversation, sort of public, private, or what have you, did anybody expect, these kinds of numbers? I mean, there was no precedent, obviously, for what we had seen in 20, as we saw great recovery after the interruptions of COVID. And so I think most people felt like as long as the conditions continued to prevail, and it made it sort of really positive for retail jewelers, that we could expect continued growth, but we didn't know how long that was going to happen. And we most certainly had no idea that it was going to be at this level. I'm still shaking my head at what it turned out to be.
Sherry, Dawn, any thoughts about that?
I can tell you with the independent channel and the ones we work with, we anticipated a strong first half, and we're wondering if maybe by the end of the summer, early fall, we could start to see, competing with travel and concerts and so forth again. And it didn't happen. It just didn't happen.
Yeah,
think
I mean,
if I
as
remember correctly,
vaccines rolled out, we thought maybe, and people were able to get out and about a little bit more, maybe they would spend money on different things and jewelry sales would kind of drop off. But yeah, that didn't happen. Edahn, what are your thoughts on your perspective?
if I remember correctly, last year we said that making any prediction in a period like that is
Yeah.
doesn't make any sense, and I'm happy in retrospect that that's what I said, because I was constantly surprised. Every number is just off the charts. So it's nothing like anybody in the right mind should have expected.
Yeah. So my next question then is obviously no. I was going to ask, did the return to being able to travel, go to concerts, etc., take a bite out of jewelry sales? Obviously not. But what is it then? Like, what is driving these record historic jewelry sales? And then, we have the numbers here, but you also, when you talk to independents, so many independents tell us that they're having the best year they've ever had. And even we talked a little bit about this last year, like especially engagement ring sales, and we'll get to that in a minute. Jewelers that say we don't really even usually have a strong engagement ring business are just, it's through the roof. So Peter, I'm going to start with you again. What are the driving factors here? What is the sudden interest in jewelry and fine jewelry that hadn't been there in the last few years?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably a combination of the practical and the psychological, right? I think on the practical side, that jewelers offered a pretty good sort of space for people to go and celebrate the occasions that didn't stop because we were in the middle of COVID. And so, whether you were spending less money on shows or travel or vacations, cruises, whatever it might have been, those options really weren't there. And so jewelry made a really good sort of and safe place to shop. And I think on the psychological side, once folks went in, jewelers had the opportunity to create a kind of a personal experience and to be very flexible in terms of pivoting quickly, whether it's to buy online, pick up in the store, or deliver to the car, whatever it might be. They were able to do that, pretty fast. And then you had the idea of having gone into the stores, consumers who had so much risk in their lives anyway, so much anxiety anyway, because living, in the middle of a global pandemic, they made safe choices, and so as I'm sure Sherry and Edahn will get into a little bit later on, that the average price points and the sort of the performance of the diamond categories in particular was a really safe choice for those folks to make. Just wasn't a time for them to take risks and with their purchasing. So I think it was a confluence of events, and I think you had sort of said did some partial opening have an impact? And again, clearly the numbers would suggest absolutely not. And just from our own experience, I know when Sherry and I started to go to shows again, you were doing so, but never being, anything other than reminded that you were doing so in the middle of a pandemic, because we were showing vaccination cards, we were wearing masks, and you may have had sort of, limited seating and things of that nature. So even though we think it opened up, and obviously that's different in some states, I think broadly speaking, we never really came out of it.
Right. Even though Sherry, Edahn, thoughts on why jewelry sales were so high?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Peter in that when people are uncomfortable or they're experiencing anxiety, human nature migrates back towards familiarity, right? Jewelry is an emotional gift and it makes you feel better. It makes you feel good. And there weren't a lot of options, the experiential vacations and, concerts being opened up. So I think, as Peter said, it became a safe choice, to celebrate. The occasions didn't go away. They still had gift giving obligations, right? Celebratory events, and jewelry was a safe option for them and a familiar option.
Right. Edahn, if you have anything to add.
Well, I think there are two main elements here, and one is the realm of psychology, which I won't get into because, for some reason people found it to be a safe place to go. But there's another element to the great rise, and that is that there was pent-up demand. And in that regard, we saw a lot of people that were thinking of getting married that didn't get married. We thought that was, kind of pretty much satisfied in 2020, but apparently it was a much bigger occurrence and influencer in 2021. In that regard, I think the question is what's going to happen next year. I have a couple of ideas. Once again, I don't want to go out on a limb here on that, but the long and short of it was that there's a lot of there were many occasions that weren't sort of satisfied in a celebratory way, and 2021 gave people an excuse to do this within the family in a closed circle sort of area, which means the expenses are lower, so you can put more into everything that goes around it. So jewelry is obviously part of it.
Yeah, very interesting. So I want to talk about a segment of the industry that's obviously a big part of any jeweler's business, and that is diamonds. So last year in this webinar, we talked about how diamond jewelry was a top seller in 2020. It performed extremely well all year. Did this continue into 2021? And an extension onto this question, did those safe choices kind of show themselves in the kind of diamond jewelry that consumers picked? And Sherry, I'm going to start with you on this one.
Okay, so again, speaking to the independent channel, yes, all diamond categories as a whole were up 41% over 2020 and 48% over 2019. And the standout category were diamond bands, which were 50% up in gross sales over 2020 and 56% up over 2019. So yeah, we saw diamond categories perform consistently double-digit growth month after month after month.
And a question about the diamond bands. So are we thinking then that people exchanged engagement rings in 2020, couldn't have a wedding, and then got the band in 2021 and had the ceremony? Is that what you're thinking there?
No, actually, we think diamond band category has been growing and performing well year over year for actually pre-pandemic. And some of that's to do with the stackables. It's a good self-purchase. It's used for all occasions. So it's not just a diamond wedding band or anniversary band anymore. It's the category is definitely broadened.
Right. I mean, yeah, and obviously the layering trend continues to be big, whether
Completely.
it's stacking rings or layering necklaces or multiple piercing, that continues to be big.
Michelle, I'd sort of just, because we got to see it across Hearts on Fire and Memoir.
Yeah.
And in that diamond band category, it all, we've started to think about it in a different way. I think for too long, we were looking at diamond bands as necessarily connected to the bridal business, when in fact, that's not the case. I mean, we've seen not just self-purchases on diamond bands and gifting on diamond bands, but important diamond bands. So I think likewise, Sherry mentioned the data, we saw on both Hearts on Fire and Memoir, huge numbers on bands far beyond what we were reasonably expecting and not really tied necessarily into bridal.
Edahn, anything to add on diamonds performance?
I could talk for hours about it.
Oh.
You only get a few minutes.
Can you wrap it up in like 3 minutes, maybe?
Sure. So first of all, absolutely, diamonds performed incredibly well this past year. I think that once again, two elements to this. One, we see a lot more transactions. And the second one is that the average ticket just shot up like, crazy. And so in other words, consumers bought more and spent more per purchase, which is, very important. Once again, if you look at it from a psychological standpoint, what does it mean? How do they understand jewelry? How do consumers want to consume jewelry? Obviously, there's a very strong attachment here that materialized very well this year, and it gives. I think it's something we should think about it when we start looking about diamond jewelry sales in the long term.
Well, Edahn, we mentioned this
Under 3 minutes.
What's that?
Under 3 minutes.
We mentioned this on last year's webinar. You talked about also like the people turning to diamond jewelry as a safe haven in times of crisis. Diamond jewelry sales shot up in Japan after the tsunami in 2011. They shot up in the US after 9/11. And we talked about this last year, and that's continuing.
Mhm.
I mean, it seems
Yes,
to
I
be.
mean, it's not just a safe haven. It's once again, pardon me for going to the realms of psychology, but it's an understanding that life is short, right? And when something like this just slaps you across the face in such a, with such magnitude, you stop and take stock of your life, and that's what's driving people to say, wait a second, there's a serious relationship. Let's take it up to the next step. Let's, to the next level. Let's, develop things. Let's, show our appreciation. And diamonds and diamond jewelry is a very good place to, it's very symbolic for, strong positive emotions.
Michelle, if I can just add to that, it would be a mistake, obviously, to think that it just manifests in engagement rings. We definitely saw superb performance engagement rings. And in our own case, we were seeing sort of 2 carat and above, a fantastic business in larger goods. But also when you look at line bracelets and line necklaces and studs, just a basic diamond product, it was phenomenal across the board.
Yeah. And I mean, I think and that could be the gifts, as like people appreciating each other in turbulent times, where it also can be for single people or just people looking for gifts for themselves. It could just be buying something to make yourself feel better.
Absolutely.
So now I want to ask something, and Edahn, I think you're the one who's going to have the data on this, and I think people are very interested to know, what role did lab-grown diamonds play in the performance of the category overall in 2021? I'm eager to get kind of a picture of where that market is headed. Is it going to become more of a bridal product, more of a fashion jewelry product? What do your statistics show so far?
Well, first of all, it seems that, and I say this cautiously, but the impression that I have is that contrary to the fear that we had, or that the diamond industry had, that lab grown will be sort of a cannibalistic, will have a cannibalistic behavior within the diamond. Now we have a broader diamond category. It may have not been the case. I think what we're seeing is that it's really additive. So it adds to the demand. It's easy to say it with this year because, just everything, grew, will be tested in other times. But I think that it brought in people that would have otherwise not bought into diamond jewelry. I think it gave people an alternative for when they wanted something that is a little bit low cost, or if somebody wanted to be cautious and go with something that is a little bit more cost, lower price points. And at the end of the day, I think that if the diamond industry the natural diamond industry will be smart about proving how, cautious it is about, where you buy your diamonds, traceability, and the broader ethical issue, we will see that diamonds in general do well. Some figures, you want some share, share in general?
I mean, you have more than
No?
3 minutes here, so please.
So we spoke last time about earrings. So earrings, you asked me, what was the winning sort of item last year, and we said that earrings, because of Zoom, this is what we see, was a big thing, and so the share of lab-grown earrings doubled. So it was 8.3% in December 2020, and we're at 19% this year, more than double. And I think that's very impressive. We see in general that the category is otherwise fairly steady. It's about 4 to 6%, depending on the month. December was a lower share because naturally people tend to gravitate to the more symbolic love. Once again, the love issue, more symbolic items. But we're keeping it at a very, I think it grabbed its share and it's being fairly steady there.
Okay.
So Michelle, can I add to that just on the independent side?
Yeah, sure.
So we are measuring just loose right now on the lab grown. And I will qualify this at the end, but it grew 73% in gross sales, 52% in units, 22% in average retail sale. And this will shock the retailers, I think. The gross margin is holding steady at 60. So now, having said all of that, it still is only about 3 to 5% of
It's
the.
still a small
Yeah,
percentage.
it's still a very small percentage. So I qualify it because I don't want people to think, oh my gosh, it's outgrowing everything else, but it's still such a small percentage. And another interesting fact amongst our independents, it's not just the millennials buying the lab grown. Baby boomers are buying it. Gen X are buying it. Wait, I can get 3.5 studs instead of 2 carats for the same money, and they're doing it. So it'll be really interesting. I look forward to hearing more from Edahn on that because he gets more into the jewelry and all. But what we're seeing is it's spread across the demographics. It's not one or the other.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. Edahn, I want to piggyback on something you said. You mentioned the importance of the natural diamond industry kind of continuing to emphasize, we know where our stones come from, they help communities, et cetera. And De Beers in its diamond report for 2021, I believe called this, where it said, we're at the sustainability tipping point. We're at the point where like operating with a sustainable operation is no longer going to be an option. It's going to be a necessity in order to reach consumers. But I'm always curious from the retailer's perspective, how many customers actually come in asking retailers about this issue? Where did this company get these diamonds? Do you know where they come from? Is that an issue on the granular level, or hasn't it filtered down? And I guess I'm asking specifically about the US consumer, because we write about this stuff and I'm always curious if retailers are reading it and kind of scoffing, like nobody ever asked me where our diamonds come from. So I don't know, anyone can jump in. I don't know if anyone has any perspective on this.
Well, I have a funny story for you about this. When the movie Blood Diamond was about to come out, there was this sort of emergency town hall meeting in Vegas, sort of adjacent to the conference, to JCK. And, all these bigwigs from the industry got up on stage and spoke about, we got to do this, we got to do that. This is the kind of thing. Then at some point, somebody got up and asked, the retailers in the crowd, how many of you, there was like, I don't know, 500 people, 200 people in the crowd. How many of you are retailers? And a bunch of people raised, a large group of people raised their hands. Like, okay, how many of you had somebody walk into the store and ask you about blood diamonds? 3 people raised their hands. At the end of this event, one of the 3 walked up to Eli Isaacoff, who was at the time the president of the World Diamond Council, and very quietly asked him, can you just explain to me one moment, what is this? I mean, I raised my hand, but what is this blood diamond thing? I mean, so people were oblivious to this whole thing. So on one hand, you don't get the question. On the other hand, the unasked question doesn't mean that the consumer doesn't have this issue, picking in their mind and they're not worried about it. And they can ask a question in a very indirect way, where's this diamond from? I understand that, these 2 diamonds are kind of similar. And this one, so let's talk about that for a moment. And no retailer in their right mind is going to say, oh, ethics, they're going to say, oh, price, right? So I think the question is how well prepared retailers are to address this issue, even if it's an indirectly asked question.
Or even if it's an infrequently asked question, even if it's only 1 out of every 100 customers.
Absolutely. And it's all about training. I mean, what kind of preparation do you have in your store with your staff ahead of such a question? And at the same time, regardless of how often or how infrequently this question is asked in store, it's the responsibility of the diamond industry to be in the forefront of addressing this, resolving this, and then putting out the message. If it succeeds in doing that, it's going to become a non-issue. If it fails in doing that, it's going to be a major issue.
Okay.
Michelle, can I put my retailer's hat on for a minute?
Yes. Yes.
And again, I agree with Edahn that retailers should always be prepared, right? What's going on? How do we answer particular questions? But our industry is infamous for creating some of these, and not necessarily around blood diamonds, but thinking that you have to be this type of store, you have to belong to this type of organization, you have to carry only, blah, blah, blah. And the reality is the average retailer doesn't get asked any of those questions. And I'm not naming any organizations because I'm not trying to call anybody out. But at the end of the day, the consumer's coming in to make a purchase. They don't care if you belong to several of these organizations, if you've got the stickers on the door, they're coming in to make a purchase. Should you be prepared and have the knowledge? Yes. But it is remarkable to me how many times, like as Edahn said, an emergency meeting and what will we do? And yet that's not going to the end user.
Yep.
And then we feel like, or our retailers feel like they're having to information dump all of this stuff that at the end of the day, the consumer's in there wanting to make an emotional purchase.
Yeah, can I just add one last thing to that? We oftentimes don't give enough credence to what's not communicated verbally in the stores. And so when you have issues like that, if it's true that 93% of what's communicated is not in words, right? Body language and tone, et cetera. It's always important to be prepared for that kind of stuff, even if it's never asked. And maybe the blood diamond is a great example that Edahn used. As a sales professional, my confidence level that if it comes up, I can address it. My certainty that I don't have to concern myself with my store, my brand, my diamonds. So I think that I think when we look for data points on it, it sort of misses the much bigger aspect of it, which is that sort of comfort level, that psychological comfort level that it is imperative sales professionals have on these issues, even if it never comes up, because it really does help them a lot. And if it helps them, it's clearly helping their customers.
Yeah,
I want to expand, if I may, on what Peter said. I think that oftentimes on this particular issue, consumers are not discovering the issue of traceability or conflict diamonds when they're in the store. By the time they got into the store, they already have an opinion about this.
right. And perhaps they wouldn't
Detailed,
be in that store if
accurate,
they felt,
whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that's why I say it's a diamond industry issue. The diamond industry has to be proactive in putting out an agenda where this is what we do, this is how we do it, and I think that you as a consumer should feel confident that you're buying something that is not harming, people or economies or whatever it is.
Okay, thank you so much. So I want to move on a little bit to talk about, and Edahn, I'm going to go back to you on this one to start. The average price of an engagement ring. What was it in 2020? What was it in 2021? And everyone's always interested in this. What are people spending on engagement rings? And my understanding it's been going up the last 2 years, correct?
I prepared a whole list for that.
Thank you.
I'm not going to take any risk that my memory may fail me. So overall, and I'm talking here specialty jewelers. So this isn't Macy's or Walmart or any of those guys. So all engagement rings, including sapphires, diamonds, pebbles, whatever it is. The average price was a very high $4,208. And I'll remind you that in 2020, the diamond engagement ring, natural diamond engagement ring, was $3,726, right, up from the traditional $3,200. Natural diamond engagement ring in Q4 of this year, $4,549.
You mean Q4 2021?
Yes. So up 22%, 33%, 33%, 22%, pardon me. Lab grown was average 3,431. So about 25% less than the natural diamond. Sherry mentioned earlier average gross margin. So the gross margins on the natural diamonds was 44%, and the gross margin on the lab grown was 54%. So that's not cash through the register. It doesn't mean that you're making more money. It's just, if it would have been 50-50, it would have gone that way. But in general, I can say that the companies, the stores that do well with lab grown sell a lot of lab grown. It could be, up to 50% of their business. So it's clearly a separate category within the diamond realm, but It's a diamond category, but within it, it's something you need to specialize in to sell it well.
So that would be completely different for our independents. But again, it's what we're looking at. But I mean, so for our independents, the average retail sale just for a loose diamond is 6,700. So you
Wow.
could see when you start to pull out. Yeah. So, and now if you factor in a semi mount, obviously it's going to bring the total average down. But again, it's the independents are filled with, all levels of stores, more branded, more, focused on this type of thing. So, Edahn, you're giving a average retail sale across the board, right?
Yeah.
All in, yeah.
Yeah, can I just pick up on that sort of independent jewelry too? Even within the independents, you have a very significant sort of quality continuum, right? And there are so many other factors that mitigate. For instance, are they branded or not? What are their demographics? What is their total volume, et cetera? So, I think when we look at averages, whether it's, what Edahn talked about or what Sherry talked about, it's important to understand that is not true for obviously a certain number of people. And in fact, lots and lots of people, because we see it across maybe our 400, 500 retail stores in total. Many retail stores that their average is 10,000 or 12,000 or even 15,000 or plus. So it really depends on, the demographics has a lot to do with that. Where is the store located? And
Right.
it's going to be, one thing in one place versus something else in another. And then sometimes within those demographics, you can have two stores in pretty close proximity who, one might have an average retail of 5,000, the other might have an average retail of 12,000. They're just very different kinds of businesses. So I think that it's important to know the data. And I think what is really comforting for and should be for everybody is that the average is going up. So people are spending, on per unit more, but to make sure that as you think about your own business, that you're putting the important and necessary qualifiers on it, not thinking, oh, I guess I've been doing just fine. I shouldn't try to increase my average sale or so on. Not that anybody would articulate that, but there's danger in, and I think we would all say this.
So
And we
that's
all
what they think
love
about when they're
data.
sleeping.
Yeah,
Right, exactly.
But
Or
Exactly.
vice versa, Peter, feel like you're lagging when you hear some average when really your demographics are just different.
yeah, well, I think there's clearly a better results if you feel like you're lagging, even if you're sort of at, generally speaking, where you probably should be at, because sort of increasing your average ticket. Eden talked earlier on, and I think Sherry would support this, that we've seen a bit of a phenomenon over the last year. And that phenomenon has been an increase in units, because we saw prior to that, for about a decade, maybe even a decade and a half, a pretty consistent decline in the number of units, as reflected by the decline in the foot traffic into the stores. This year was different in that regard, because many stores, all the reasons that we've all talked about earlier on, and also because depending on what state you were in, what city you were in, some folks were up against previous years where they were closed for periods of time, whether it was the, problems in the cities, or whether it was early stages of COVID or whatever it might have been. So I think that it would be dangerous for anybody to think that lots and lots of good learnings over the last couple of years, but one of them is probably not that we can anticipate units increasing as we get to the back end of this. I think that we're going to go back to seeing a decline in units, and that puts a whole lot more pressure on folks to execute higher average tickets, because there'll just be less units.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Peter. I want to circle back around that too when we get on to talking about looking ahead to 2022. One more question before we kind of move on to the year ahead. Outside of diamond goods, what other product categories were standouts in 2021? Anything, we don't have to go through anything, but anything off the top of your head, you'd say, wow, like people sold so many watches, or they sold
Rolex.
so many.
Rolex. That was Rolex. Yep.
I did some research on Rolex prices in the past few years, and just the trajectory is insane.
Mhm.
Okay,
Specific models, by the way. So the GMT Master, just Submariner, others less, but some of them did. I mean, they still did. All of them did very well. The interesting thing is, so I know this guy who specializes in vintage watches, and I was asking him a little bit for a few figures, and he gave me a few examples. And essentially, a watch, a classic watch from, you know, the 1960s will sell for a lot more than a watch brand new that you just bought. And if, you know, so I mentioned the GMT Master, so, you know, it has this color dial on it. So, you know, if it fades, it gets sort of what they call the ghosting effect. You know, it pushes up the price. So, you know, yay to defects, I guess.
Can I just say, that because it is becoming its own phenomenon, that there's danger in looking at what's going on with Rolex and saying that's reflective of timepieces, period. I think that Rolex, sort of like we were talking about with diamond bands earlier on, it's become its own category. And so I would
Right.
say, hey, watches were fantastic. That wouldn't be true of a great many of them. It certainly would be with Rolex, but I think we almost need to separate that now and say that's its own category, just as we're doing in a little bit more microcosmic
Well,
way with.
I think Rolex is a exceptional brand in the sense that it kind of taps into two areas. You know, the area used to be 5,000 and below, and then 5,000 and above, and they were just smack in the middle, and they could tap into two different markets. Today, it's around 10,000, but if you look at the luxury side of it, those that do sell from 5,000 and above, they did exceptionally well. And one of the reasons is the same reason as high-end jewelry. What people are seeing is, you know, I have money, I don't know where to spend it, and, you know, let's put it into something that, in essence, seems like an asset. It might be, or maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But I think, you know, as far as men jewelry goes, that's the
Yeah. And I think too, I mean, I'd add on to that, that I think, you know, Rolex kind of occupies the same position as diamonds. When people think safe purchase and jewelry, diamonds. When people think luxury watches, what's the first, if you stop 10 consumers on the street, name a luxury watch brand, 9 out of 10 of them would say Rolex before anything else. I mean, it
Yeah.
just has that absolute, and then you start reading more and more of these stories. Oh, I sold my Rolex after 30 years and it was worth this much. I mean, it's a safe haven and it's a known brand. And as we've already talked about, people gravitate towards the familiar when things are uncertain. And I think in
I mean, just
luxury
look at
watches,
prices. Look
get
at
any more
prices at
familiar.
auctions. Yeah, I mean, you
Right.
know,
It doesn't get
Christie's,
any more familiar in luxury watches than Rolex.
Yep.
Any thoughts about anything else that's sold other than diamonds and Rolex?
Yeah, it's nice.
It's all right if you don't have any.
It's a big drop off after those.
Yeah, it is a
two.
big drop off.
All right. So now I want to look ahead to 2022. How long will the party go on? I think that's kind of the question that everybody's asking. I know we've kind of already covered that the semi-return to being able to go out, to travel, to go to shows in 2021 didn't take a bite out of jewelry sales, but what about as the pandemic, you know, kind of we move through it and we return to more international travel, you know, big people are able to take bigger trips that cost more money. Like what is the outlook here for 2022?
I'll start. So I feel like this is deja vu, right?
Can we stop
all
recording
over
this
again?
section?
Yeah. It's just like you could probably insert right from the last year's webinar. Again, you know, and it's funny, we're getting asked this, Michelle, on a daily basis from vendors, from retailers, from everybody. And my crystal ball is broken. So the reality is we're still dealing with the exact same challenges we were dealing this time last year. You know, there's a surge with a new variant. You know, as Peter said, we were just going back to music shows. I believe some of them are already canceled again and rescheduled. You know, people have some travel restrictions. You can travel, but you're going to quarantine for 2 weeks to come in. So they're not doing it, you know. So we're still dealing with the same circumstances. So it's hard to predict. Will that be better? Will it be different by the summer? Will it be different by the fall? We don't know. I do think when it travels fully functional, like back to pre-pandemic, we will be competing for that luxury dollar again. There's no doubt. People are going to be dying to get out and go do some of the things they haven't done now for over 2 years.
Right. But it's hard to say, Sherry, if that's going to be latter half of 2022, 23, 2023 or even 2024. It's very hard to say. I'm
It
sorry, I
is.
didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I agree. And Peter and I talk about this stuff all the time. And, we're dealing with the same circumstances. So all we can tell you is, let's plan accordingly and be willing to adapt quickly should the circumstances change. That's how we're advising our retailers and our vendors.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the best advice you can
advice.
give them.
Yep.
Edahn or Peter, whoever wants to jump in next.
Yeah, I'll defer to Edahn.
I think that in terms of advice to retailers, I would say that we shouldn't assume that what's happening today will be here tomorrow. Economic activity is cyclical, and so to be practical, this is a good time because we are at a high tide. This is a good time to think long term. It's difficult to do that when you're having a hard time generating sales and so this is a very good time to think long term, even though it seems like I know how to do business and look at how this last mistake. This is the time to think long term because January it's slow, February there's going to be a little bit of pickup in the demand, but right now think long term. And if there's any advice in that regard, I'll say think marketing. If you want a prediction, I actually feel that we're starting to get used to the new situation. I mean, we are very adaptive to change, and we're starting to get used to it. I'm just looking around, and when I walk down the street, how many people are wearing masks? We kind of got used to the fact that if somebody asks you to wear a mask, it's no big deal. On one hand, on the other hand, some places people are not wearing masks anymore. I mean, this is we got used to it. If you look in terms of the broader economy, zero interest rate is dying, zero inflation is dying. I think that we're going to go into a period. January, February is going to be fantastic for everybody. The question is, how long will it last? Will it last till May? Will it last till the summer? Or will it end in March? I think that we're going to see a slow decline. We're still on a very high area, very high level, but I think we're going to see a slow decline in activity. If we talk about the wholesale diamond market, so we just say that $94 billion in jewelry sales is an insane record. If you look at diamond prices, they didn't rise to what we saw in say 2011. So we didn't reach the point where we know that the American consumer says this is it, we're not going to pay any more for this. So I think diamond prices are going to remain fairly high. They may recede a little bit, but I think in general, we're going to get used to the situation. We're going to get used to the fact that we're going to travel locally, support local businesses, which is one of the things that I think that drove the independents, very good activity in this past year. So I think we should be cautious, but I think we're going to get used to where we are right now.
Okay. Peter, thoughts on 2022?
Well, I think I'm only partially joking when I said, this part we should have stopped recording because anybody, who tells you they know what's going to happen.
Because we did.
Yeah. Probably has a sizable quantity of bridges they're looking to sell you as well, right? Because we just simply have no idea. There's no doubt. Edahn mentioned the term high tide. We are building now off the highest tide. And I think that is a reality that at some point we're going to have to contend with, that you're building not off of strength, but off of strength and beyond what we've ever seen before. And I agree, it would be a huge, huge mistake to think there's just an entitlement to think that that's going to continue
Right.
to build. So you certainly hope that people learn some things over the last couple of years and are doing things a little bit differently as a consequence of having the luxury of not having to worry about how to pay their bills or their team or whatever the case may be. And so, what does that look like? Well, I think there's a number of things. One is using technology to analyze their business. It's no sort of, a coincidence that, two of the people on the Brady Bunch screen here are people who are so about data. And I think that any business today that's not using data to make decisions, there's a massive disconnect. I think automation, as much as you can possibly automate so that every single thing is not an individual decision. So every possibility to automate I think is huge. I think we've said it till we're blue in the face, but it is no less true, is just simply never be out of stock of best-selling products. I mean, the idea that anybody would has never sort of sat well with me, and I think that's one thing that will help a lot of folks when we do in fact return to some sort of headwinds and have to work not a little bit harder, but work with perhaps less resources for a smaller deal. So I think going deeper and going in the most relevant categories is huge. And then again, it's not news. Other people and people better qualified than me have said it. Making sure that your physical store, your online presence, your e-commerce, your social media, that everything communicates what it is you're about in a clear way. We can spend massive amounts of money on marketing, but if it's a very incoherent message, it's wasted money. If consumer can clearly look at what your communication strategy is, and it is in fact reflective of all of the touch points in your business, I think then you can be very, very hopeful for what's going to happen. So I think, in some respects, we've gotten away with a little bit of clerking over the last couple of years because there have been so many people coming in. That will change, and we're going to have to get back to really, really good execution and really, really good execution at higher average tickets.
Peter, I think that's an excellent note to end on before I push it over to Brecken for the questions. Thank you all so much today. And as I mentioned, I'm going to turn it over to Brecken now, and she's going to come in with any audience questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody, for such a great discussion, as always. So interesting. Just as a reminder for our audience, you can still drop questions into the Q&A box or the chat, and I'll try to get to as many as I can in the next 15 minutes or so. I want to start with a question that came right at the beginning as we were looking back on 2021 and how well it went. Did the rising tide lift all boats, or are there any categories that also stand out as maybe not having been lifted quite as high? And what would that be?
Can I just, because we don't talk about it enough, we've got about 1,000 shopping malls in the US, and 300 to 400 of those are what would be classed reasonably as C and D malls. Whether there's a local independent or a small regional chain, or even some element of mass retailers within those malls, they're going away, right? In the next 2 to 3 to 4 years, those C and D malls, maybe as many as 300 to 400, are going away. So I think many people in our industry benefited from the rapidly rising tide. I don't think that would be true necessarily of anybody trying to sell jewelry in C and D malls.
Okay. Great point. Sherry or Edahn, do either of you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Edahn.
No, please.
I was just going to say, there were some struggles amongst the silver categories. Sterling silver did well through the last recession, as you recall. People didn't feel guilty about buying them, treating themselves to a lower price point. So a lot of the diminishing units that we saw over the last 5 years or so were particularly in the sterling silver category. So even though there were some struggles or in the units, they've more than made it up, and we're actually seeing sterling silver up again in units and average retail sale, higher price point than it used to be, because some of those low price point B companies and so forth have sort of gone away. But otherwise, most of the categories performed well. They just were a huge drop off from the diamond categories and what we saw.
I want to jump in here with a question actually for Edahn, and I don't know, Edahn, if this is what you were going to say. I was curious if you have any insight on the kind of retailers who sell on cruise ships or depend mainly on ports of vacation, ports of call for their business. If that's a segment that comes to mind, I kind of wonder how those
do well. I mean, what is more tied to the idea of COVID than, Princess Diamond Princess, what's the name of that ship? So they did not do well. That's the long and short of it. But to answer the question about performance, I think there was a halo effect. So even if you walked into the store, and I remember once talking with somebody who walked into Tiffany, was just shocked by the prices, and I mean she just didn't expect it, and that kind of explains why Tiffany's average price point is kind of low, because people walk in and they just walk out with a pen, right? And if you look at it, you'll see that there are a lot of companies and categories that did better this year, but they did better sort of riding on the tailcoats of other items, not because there was great demand in particular. And once again, this is your opportunity to build on that and take it further. Don't wait till the direction of the wind changes.
Okay,
Mm.
Brecken, any more questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, this makes me want to jump to an interesting question we had, which came in before, which is, do you think that live stream shopping is in the cards for fine jewelry? Will US shoppers adapt like they have in Asia? Just as a thought for like another channel.
I have no idea what that means.
Yeah, are they meaning like via a Zoom call or?
I mean, that's a great question. It came in before, so it's hard to clarify. So I'm not sure if they would mean something like, QVC or even like something like a Facebook Live if you're a smaller.
Right. Sorry, Brecken.
Yeah.
The only thing I would say to that is during COVID, during 2020, our independents, and again, I'm only speaking to the independent channel, they got very creative. They did host virtual trunk shows. They did host, Facebook Live auctions, and it helped get in front of their customers, and they did well. Do I see it as a permanent replacement? Probably not, because it's luxury. We still want to feel it, touch it. We buy from people we have relationships with. But it doesn't mean that, if given all the variants and the variables that we keep dealing with, that they won't occasionally tap into some of those tools. I think it'll become part of their permanent, arsenal, but it wouldn't be their go-to. I don't think it's going to replace a huge part of their purchase.
Yeah. And if I could just jump in here, I think also jewelers need to keep live stream in mind for things like you could do a jewelry cleaning demonstration on live stream. Like there's a lot of stuff you can do to engage your customers that doesn't involve sales. Like, ultimately, as Sherry said, they'll likely come in the store, and we've seen that. But I think there's a lot of interest that you could do on Instagram Live, Facebook Lives, and we see jewelers on these platforms going live all the time to, at the beginning of the month, you could have a little birthstone show, like this month's birthstone
Absolutely.
is garnet. Here's some beautiful garnet jewelry you have. Garnets have been said to cure illness. I mean, whatever it is about garnets, I don't know if that's a thing, but just something like there are creative ways to take care of live stream that don't need to necessarily translate to it being for sales, for it to be useful.
It's a marketing tool. It will be used
Right.
as a marketing tool.
Yeah, definitely. It's a great way.
I think
to
it'll
reach-
have a
reach
place for
people.
sure.
It
place,
will have its place.
no question.
Yeah.
I think as long as retailers remain innovative and cater smartly to their clients, to their customer base, I mean, that's marketing. That's what it's all about. It's not about putting just an ad in the newspaper. It's
Yeah.
trunk shows is, terrific for COVID.
Yep.
So I think in that regard, marketing. I mean, just keep thinking, what is the people need? What is it they want? How to address them? Have your phone book with, it's this guy's anniversary coming up. Let's give him a call. All the tricks in the book, everything
Right.
should be exercised.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And so to jump quickly back to lab-grown diamonds, we had a question come in who maybe I'll direct this at Edahn first and see if there's anything else to add. Where is lab-grown pricing going this year? And how might that affect prices and volume of natural stones?
The simple answer is down. But let's break it down for a moment. Wholesale prices are sinking. Retail prices are coming down, but at a much slower pace, which means that retailers are capturing a greater return on these goods. Another interesting thing about lab grown, the turn in general is a lot faster. In the long term, I think that those that sell lab grown should really think in terms, once again, brand marketing, but so it's branding, quality of well-designed, quality workmanship, and put your emphasis on that, not on the fact that it's lab grown, and you'd be okay.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you. And as a follow-up, you mentioned earlier that you see the prices of natural diamonds sort of staying where they are. So the separation between prices you see as growing farther apart through the year.
No, polished prices increased tremendously this
Increase.
past year. I mean, we're seeing, 30% price increases, across the board. But I mean, on average across the board. But I don't expect them to fall. That's the important thing.
Okay.
Historically, natural diamond prices, when they rise high, they tend to fall right afterwards. And this time around, I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think that they're going to remain fairly high, and kind of, if they decline, it's going to be at a very slow pace.
And
Okay.
Brecken, can I just add
Yeah.
to the lab grown again, only
Please.
in the independent channel with the sample of it being about 5% of natural. We're seeing the average retail sale go up. And again, this is just in the independent who processed a loose lab grown diamond. Interesting,
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
Well, and actually, in a way, it makes a lot of sense because, as I said earlier, those who know how to sell very well. So if you look at it on a store-by-store basis, those that are seeing good business are those that sell a lot do very well. Their average prices are up because at the end, if you know how to brand it, if you know how to package it, there are a lot of wholesalers out there and producers and growers that are very smart at supporting retailers and their marketing programs. And in that regard, that's why I feel that if there is to be any future for lab grown, it has to be in branding and high quality jewelry.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you both. And I wanted to go back, Sherry. We had somebody who was asking if you had an average engagement ring sale, like sort of final price among independents. I'm sorry if I missed that.
Final average retail sale.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just that we would be more inclined to separate it out because, I did a project, for example, yesterday for a vendor, and we're looking at urban and suburban versus rural. There's a huge variance when you start factoring that in, destination store and all. So we're very, very careful when we throw out average retail sales because we don't want everybody to think, as you heard Peter say earlier, someone could think, oh, I'm way outperforming the, national average retail sale when it's not applicable. It's not apples to apples. So again, I can tell you our average retail sale for loose is 6,700. The average retail sale for semi-mounts is around 2,000 to 2,300. But that's in very broad terms. I would never want someone to, if they're in an urban location and a destination store and brand it, I wouldn't want them to use that as the bar, that they're measuring against. So
yeah, absolutely. Oh, that makes sense. We sometimes, when we look at the knots numbers, and they pull out specific areas and you look at like New York City's average engagement ring and it's humongous. So I think that makes sense.
Completely.
You have to keep in mind how it's segmented. Right. Thank you.
Can I jump in really quickly?
Yeah.
I just noticed that a couple of people have been asking about the figures we've been throwing out. For example, the 93 billion that Edahn started with. People are asking if these are U.S. or global figures, and the figures we're discussing here today are U.S.
U.S. Everything is U.S.
Yeah, everything.
Oh, thank you, Michelle. I'm glad you caught that. I think we have time for one more question, so I'll end with this one. Given the data, are consumers, given the growing average retail, heading for finer diamonds or larger, less fine diamonds?
Larger, better, nicer,
Yes,
prettier,
Yes.
Everything.
branded.
Yes.
I want to talk about something that Peter mentioned earlier when he talked about millennials, et cetera. If there's something that we're really seeing about, that demographic, how old are millennials now? 25 to 35?
Yeah.
They get
I mean, actually,
So
the oldest millennials, I think, are 40 now.
Yeah, I think so.
40,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So within that group, let's limit it to 25 to 35. So it's 10 years. This is the age where people get married. The average first marriage in the United States is about, if I remember correctly, it's 29. It's 30 for men and 28 for women.
Yeah, somewhere around there.
And so they're going for branded. They want high quality. They want to have it personalized. So all of those are elements that push up the price. But if you look about the stone itself, so once again, branded, sales of 4, 5, 10 carat stones. 10 carat stones are, they were down for 3 years straight up until 2020, and since then it was just through the roof. So these are investments, so DIFs, these are investment items, doing very well. Argyle closed, so the pinks, the purples, the reds, all of them are just insane. Blues always did very well. So, but on a more commercial level, people gravitated to bigger and nicer diamonds.
Okay, great. Well, I think that's all we have time for now. I just want to say thank you again to our guests, Edahn, Sherry, and Peter, and Michelle, of course, for hosting today. Really appreciate you guys being here and all your wonderful insights. My next questions returning next Tuesday, January 18th, when I'll be joined by 3 gemstone dealers who are going to help us sort of unwrap what to look forward to at Tucson this year. I'm dropping the link in the chat right now for anyone who would like to register for that. Thanks again for joining us today, everybody, and please take care.